thanks for joining me today for a coffee.
Hey, Amy. Good afternoon. How are you? It's nice to see you.
Good, good. I'm good. It's a rainy Monday morning here in Los Angeles, and you're in the DC area, and I hope enjoying some spring weather.
Yeah, we had some nice weather yesterday, but it's also a little bit windy and gray today.
Not a great way to start off Monday, but
Yeah.
this is so exciting that you're joining me this today, and I really look forward to our little chat here. So, Julie Cerqeira, you have a long career arc helping U.S. states advocate for clean energy policies and climate priorities. Uh, Previously, you were with the U.S. State Department in that role and in the Office of Global Change. And then now you are the executive director of the U.S. Climate Alliance. So, can you paint us a picture of what's going on with the U.S. states in terms of advancing climate action during this pandemic, and then what it looks like possibly in a post-pandemic world, which will be our new normal?
hmm Well, so I mean, even when I was under the Obama administration at the State Department, states were always playing a leadership role here in the United States on climate policy. I mean, we see that, some of the reasons for the stringent standards we have to make sure that our automobiles are clean come from the states, right? And then are adopted at the federal level. So they've always been the innovators, the laboratories, the ones that are pushing the sort of the envelope on climate action. And so I think that will continue into the future. There's no reason that it shouldn't. As we're thinking about the response to the pandemic, though, first and foremost, I think our governors are most concerned with protecting the health of their communities, to focus on how they can pivot to opening up their economies in a way that is safe and is sustainable, while also making sure that they're moving towards a recovery at some point, which is when we'd hopefully like to see some investments in our critical infrastructure. And so I think on the climate front, you're going to continue to see, and you actually already are now, climate policies continuing to come forward, but it's balancing that also with other needs that states have in terms of backfilling some of those revenues and making sure that they can continue to provide critical government services.
Great. So you are seeing that the recovery and the challenges of dealing with COVID and the climate crisis are convening in some areas.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and especially because, I think what we've seen is that communities who have historically been marginalized or disadvantaged are also more vulnerable to these health pandemics. And many of the climate policies that we would put in place to deal with carbon pollution are also similar to those policies that you would put in place to deal with air pollution, right? And so there are ways of us addressing both health and economic crises that are good for the climate, that invest in our critical infrastructure, provide good jobs, and also support the health of our communities, especially those who are most vulnerable.
Right? Because at the end of the day, climate change, the climate crisis is really it's an environmental issue, but it's also a health issue.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I know the U.S. Climate Alliance has also been advocating for clean, green energy policies and climate priorities as part of any of the legislation being advanced in Congress right now. How is that going? And my question is specifically, what priorities is the Alliance really pressing for?
hmm So we're working with the states to determine sort of what a package of recommendations could be for the recovery phase. So again, I think it's important to note that states are still focused on the emergency response and on ensuring that they have enough revenues to be able to provide those critical government services that we were talking about. So making sure that teachers can stay in schools, to make sure that police and firefighters, that those costs are covered. So that first and foremost is the priority. As we're moving towards a recovery and looking at what those investments look like, and how we stimulate an economic recovery that is sustainable, then that's what we're thinking about, in terms of where those investments could go, as well as how those resources could be deployed. So when we look at the 2008 crisis and the recovery packages then, there are a lot of lessons learned from that experience. One of the most important things is that we need to find programs that are frictionless for how those resources could be deployed. And so I think that what the states will be calling for is making sure that the recovery phase, those investments are made in such a way that they can be most flexibly provided to the states, who can then determine at the state level how those resources should be allocated. As we've been talking to the states, it's clear that there's kind of three major priorities. I would say the first is investing in our critical infrastructure in a way that can modernize our infrastructure, decarbonize it, and also enhance the resilience of that infrastructure. And that's everything from modernizing our clean energy grid to making sure that we've got like EV infrastructure that's built out, making sure that we're actually using our natural and working lands to enhance carbon sequestration through things like soil health initiatives that also help the productivity for our farmers. Looking at how we can have more resilient infrastructure, so that's resilient not only to severe weather events, but also resilient to future health crises, right? So looking more broadly at what infrastructure investments are needed in order for us to not just build back what we lost, but build back better or build forward. In addition to that, we're looking at sort of the job creation piece, right? And so how can we make sure that we're getting people into jobs not only as fast as possible, but that those are family sustaining jobs? I think most of us would agree that the pandemic has really opened our eyes to some of the failures in our system. And so, we're asking people to continue feeding the country and to continue to provide those services when they don't have a lot of protections in place for themselves and for their families as well. And so how can we make sure that people are getting not only into jobs in the near term that are part of that recovery effort, but that those are longer term jobs, that there's a pipeline of projects, and that those jobs have the appropriate wages and benefits and protections in place that they can really help to actually sustain those families. The third piece is also private sector mobilization. And so looking at how we can actually have targeted investments where you're able to leverage public dollars to get more private sector investment, which is going to be critical for any long-term growth. So at least what I'm seeing at this stage is those are the three buckets of where the priorities will be, and just getting more money into programs that have been proven to work in the past and can be deployed as quickly as possible.
So infrastructure, jobs, and public-private partnerships will really be the drivers that you're looking for in the legislation.
Yeah.
Great. I wanted to ask you a follow-up question. I know that in the past, the U.S. Climate Alliance has worked internationally and had some conversations with the EU. Are those discussions ongoing now in terms of trying to align policy? So much is being done in France, trying to align their recovery, dealing with the climate crisis as well.
So I wouldn't say that it's a policy alignment. There is some continued cooperation, for example, with the European Union on how to finance our climate resilience. So it's been quite difficult to get more investments into resilience because you're looking primarily at avoided costs, right? It's a slightly different model. So we're still continuing to share experiences with them on just lessons learned that could be applied here in the United States and things that they could learn from our US states and apply in Europe. Some of our other cooperation, we are still in the process of determining how do we pivot under this new circumstance, right? And it's both, our strongest cooperation right now is with Canada and Mexico as part of our North America Climate Leadership Dialogue. Obviously, the Trudeau administration is in their second term, and then we have a new government in Mexico. We also had a number of new states, about 8 new states that joined since we first made our series of mutual commitments. And so we're at a period now where we're refreshing that partnership to determine what are our mutual goals going forward and in what ways can we continue to cooperate across the region.
That's great news. And so my last question is, what gives you inspiration and hope for the future, besides your new baby?
Yeah, that would be great. She's definitely going to give me lots of hope. um, I think in addition to that, frankly, it's just the leadership that our governors have shown. This is an incredibly complex crisis that, I mean, frankly, we were underprepared for, and they have stepped up to the plate, and they are really trying to balance protecting their communities, finding ways of enhancing testing, of getting the vaccines out, of making sure people are able to safely go back to work, to open up their economies. And I think that they have been decisive. They have looked at science-based approaches. They have worked together to determine regionally when do you open up your economies in a way that is the safest for their communities. And so that leadership at the state level has given me hope that we can figure this out, and we can figure out how to respond to climate change in a way that is impactful and puts us on a different trajectory. And I'm hoping that as we move into 2021, that there is an opportunity for us to re-examine the way that we've been responding to these crises, and that's not just health crises, but environmental and climate crises, and that these governors can help to really inform what becomes future national policy.
Well put, well said. The governors certainly have been leaders on the subnational level and on the international stage. And to your points earlier about preparation and building resiliency, those are lessons that we are learning again with COVID, but also that we know apply to climate change. So Julie, with that, I will let you go on with your busy day, and I want to thank you again for spending some time with me today. I really look forward to seeing you again sometime in the future.
Yeah, likewise, Amy. It was great seeing you, and thanks for the opportunity to chat.
Thank you. Take care, Julie. Bye.
Bye.